Welcome to History Crossroads, where past meets present, and every story reveals a new path through time. Picture this: the world is at war. Nations clash in a deadly game of strategy, betrayal, and survival. Amid the smoke and ruins of Europe, one man walks a precarious line between loyalty and treachery. His name, Eddie Chapman. To the Germans, he was Agent Fritz, a trusted spy. To the British, he was Agent Zigzag, a double agent whose unpredictable nature kept him on edge. But to himself, well, that depends on who was asking. Eddie Chapman's story is a kaleidoscope of contradiction. A petty criminal termed wartime operative, he was as much a thief as he was a patriot, as much a hero as he was a scoundrel. Born in the quiet village of Burnup Field, County Durham, he would rise or fall, depending on your perspective, to become one of the most enigmatic figures of World War II. Today, on History Crossroads, we unravel the life of a man who defied labels, danced with danger, and mastered the art of deception. From high-stakes heists to death-defying espionage, Eddie Chapman's life was a wild zigzag of choices and consequences. But the question remains, was he a hero, or was he simply playing both sides to save his own skin? Join us as we delve into the shadowed world of Eddie Chapman, a world where secrets are currency, loyalties are fleeting, and survival is the ultimate goal. This is History Crossroads, and this is the story of Agent Zigzag. Eddie Chapman's story begins in Burnup Field, a quiet village tucked away in the County Durham countryside. On November 16, 1940, Burnup Field was a modest place, shaped by the rugged beauty of northern England. Smoke from coal-fired chimneys mixed with the crisp country air, a reminder of the hard-working families who lived there. It was an unassuming start for a boy who would later move in the shadows of Europe's most perilous arenas. The early years of Eddie's life were marked by a restlessness that couldn't be contained by Burnup Field's narrow lanes. His charm and quick wit set him apart even as a boy, but so did a defiance that often got him in trouble. The world was between wars, and the Great Depression loomed like a storm cloud over England's working-class town. Jobs were scarce, and the allure of fast money proved irresistible to the young chap. By the time Eddie left home as a teenager, he had little to lose and an appetite for excitement. He gravitated to London, a city bursting with promise and danger. The roaring streets, filled with chatter and the clang of tram bells, became his new playground. And in the shadow of the metropolis, Chapman discovered his calling, not as a worker or craftsman, but as a criminal. London in the 1930s was a city with two faces. On one side, it boasted elegant tea rooms, glittering theaters, and a towering spire of St. Paul's Cathedral. On the other, it harbored a gritty underworld where ambition met desperation. It was here that Eddie joined the infamous Jelly Gang, a group known for their expertise in blowing open safes using gelinite. The name may have sounded whimsical, but their exploits were anything but. Eddie quickly became a key figure in the gang. His charisma and boldness set him apart. He wasn't just another thief, he was the ringleader's favorite, a natural strategist with an eye for opportunity. The gang trusted him, and he thrived on the adrenaline of their heist. But Chapman's love of danger was matched only by his love of drama. To him, every heist was a performance, a chance to dazzle as well as to steal. One of their most daring operations was the burglary of Isobel's, a high-end furrier. The gang meticulously planned the heist, pacing the shop and studying its security measures. On a cold evening, with the fog settling over the city like a blanket, they struck. The sound of breaking glass pierced the silence as they made off with mink coats and capes valued at 200 pounds, a princely sum in those days. The gang celebrated their haul in the back room of a dimly lit pub, but Chapman, ever the showman, reveled in recounting the details to anyone who would listen. Another infamous job targeted a pawnbroker. This time, the stakes were higher. The gang cracked the safe, and when the door swung open, they found a treasure trove of cash and valuables, 15,000 pounds in total. It was the kind of haul that could set a man up for life. But for Chapman, it wasn't about the money. It was about the thrill of the chase, the game of outsmarting the system. Chapman's boldness wasn't limited to his criminal ventures. He was a man who thrived on risk in all areas of his life, whether he was charming women in the smoky London clubs or evading police on the rain-slicked streets. He lived every day as if it might be his last, but his luck was bound to run out. The authorities had been tracking the Jelly Gang for months. Their reputation had grown too large to ignore. Chapman, the gang's most flamboyant member, was their prime target. In a dramatic raid, police finally caught up with him. The arrest was spectacle worthy of his reputation. Officers bursting through the doors, a brief chase, and Chapman's inevitable capture. He was sentenced to imprisonment on the Channel Island of Jersey, a remote outpost far from the bustling streets of London. For most criminals, prison is the end of the line, but for Eddie Chapman, it was only the beginning. Behind the walls of the Jersey prison, under the shadow of the war, he would find an opportunity to reinvent himself, a chance to turn his greatest liability into his greatest weapon. When Eddie Chapman was sentenced to prison on the Channel Island of Jersey, he assumed it was the end of his criminal career. But Eddie was no ordinary criminal. The island, though beautiful, had become a dark place under German occupation. Its cobblestone streets, once filled with the chatter of locals and visitors, were now eerily silent, patrolled by Nazi soldiers whose very presence stifled any sense of normalcy. Chapman's cell was small, just a cot, a table, and a narrow window that looked out toward the English Channel. The water was a constant reminder of his isolation, so close to home and yet impossibly far. Days blurred into nights as he marked time on the rough stone wall, each line a testament to his growing frustration. But Eddie Chapman was not one to surrender to circumstance. When the Germans invaded Jersey, they brought with them an opportunity that only a mind like Chapman's could see. They needed informants, collaborators, and most importantly, spies. Chapman, ever the opportunist, realized that his skill set, his charm, his cunning, and his willingness to take risks might be just what the Nazis were looking for. One day, as he stared out his window at the distant horizon, the idea began to form. What if he could use the Germans to secure his freedom? What if he, Eddie Chapman, could rewrite his story? Chapman requested a meeting with the German commandant. The guards, suspicious but intrigued, led him into an austere office, its walls lined with maps of the British Isles. A German officer, stern and sharp-eyed, sat behind a heavy oak desk. Chapman, unshackled but still wearing his prison uniform, exuded an air of confidence that belied his circumstances. "I can help," he began, his voice steady. "I know England. I know how to move unseen, and I know how to get results." The officer raised an eyebrow, skeptical but intrigued. Chapman outlined his proposal. He would work as a spy for the Germans, using his skills to infiltrate British territory, carry out acts of sabotage. In return, he wanted freedom and a chance to prove his worth. The Germans were intrigued. Here was a man who, despite being a prisoner, radiated confidence and capability. After some deliberation, they decided to take a chance on Chapman. He was transferred to France, where his transformation from petty criminal to trained spy began. At an Abwehr training facility in occupied France, Chapman was introduced to the shadowy world of espionage. He learned how to handle explosives with precision, how to decipher codes, and how to use a radio transmitter to send covert messages. He practiced parachuting from planes, his first taste of the high-stakes missions that would soon become his reality. The instructors were thorough but cold, their voices sharp as they drilled Chapman on sabotage techniques. Despite the intensity, Chapman excelled. His criminal past had prepared him well. He knew how to think on his feet, how to plan a job, and most importantly, how to lie convincingly. The Germans gave him the codename Fritz and began to plan his first mission to sabotage the de Havilland aircraft factory in England. The factory was a crucial target. It was responsible for producing the Mosquito bomber, a lightweight but deadly aircraft that had become a thorn in the side of the Luftwaffe. And if Chapman could destroy it, the Germans believed it would deal a significant blow to the British war effort. In December of 1942, Chapman was parachuted into Cambridgeshire under the cover of darkness. The German plan was clear: sabotage the factory and escape undetected. But as Chapman stood in the stillness of the English countryside, his thoughts weren't on the mission, they were on survival. He made his way to the nearest village and sought out British authorities. When he was finally brought to MI5, Chapman made his move. He confessed everything: his training, his mission, and his willingness to become a double agent. It was a gamble, but one Chapman believed he could win. After all, deception was his greatest talent. The MI5 officers, initially skeptical, quickly realized Chapman's potential. Here was a man who had not only infiltrated German intelligence, but was also willing to play both sides for the sake of his own freedom. They gave him the codename Zigzag, the name perfectly capturing his unpredictable nature. As Chapman sat in the dimly lit MI5 office, a sly smile playing on his lips, the stage was set for one of the most audacious chapters of his life. Eddie Chapman had pulled off his first great deception, not against the Germans, but for the British. Sitting across from the MI5 officers in the shadowy confines of a secure facility, Chapman outlined the training he had received from the Abwehr. His orders were to sabotage the de Havilland aircraft factory, and his plan to turn the Germans' trust into an advantage for the Allies. Chapman's charm worked wonders. He was a rare find, a man who could play both sides with ease, whose very nature was unpredictable. The British, knowing they could not afford to waste such a resource, decided to take a calculated risk, and they agreed to his proposal, officially making him Agent Zigzag. The de Havilland factory, Hatfield, Hertfordshire, was a lifeline for the British war effort. Producing the revolutionary Mosquito bomber, the facility operated around the clock, churning out aircraft that were faster, lighter, and more versatile than anything the Germans had in their arsenal. For the Abwehr, destroying this factory was a top priority. For MI5, it was the perfect opportunity to test Chapman's loyalty. Chapman's mission was simple on paper: convince the Germans that he had successfully sabotaged the factory. But the execution required finesse. MI5 devised an elaborate ruse to stage the destruction of a key part of the facility. They worked with factory managers to create the illusion of significant damage without actually halting production. Debris was carefully scattered, machinery was cosmetically damaged, and photographs were taken to sell the illusion. Chapman, with his characteristic confidence, delivered the evidence to his German handlers. He described the sabotage in vivid detail, emphasizing the disruption it had caused to the production line. The photographs and his persuasive storytelling convinced the Abwehr that the mission had been a resounding success. So convincing was his performance that the Germans awarded him the Iron Cross, one of their highest military honors, a rare and ironic accolade for a British double agent. For Chapman, this moment was both a triumph and a tightrope walk. He knew that any slip-up could expose him, leading to torture or death. Yet he thrived under the pressure. His ability to weave believable lies and adapt to rapidly changing circumstances made him invaluable to MI5. Chapman's success with the de Havilland mission emboldened MI5. They began using him in more complex operations, leveraging his charm and connections to gather intelligence and feed disinformation to the Germans. Every mission was a gamble, a dangerous dance where one misstep could bring the whole operation crashing down. Yet Chapman seemed to revel in the risk, treating each assignment like a high stakes game he was determined to win. Behind the scenes, however, MI5 agents were cautious. They knew Chapman's loyalty was pragmatic rather than ideological. He wasn't a patriot, he was a survivor. But as long as his interests aligned with theirs, they were willing to take the gamble. I've done what you've asked, he says, pausing for dramatic effect. The damage is done. The production is crippled. On the other end of the line, his German handler expresses satisfaction, unaware of the charade they've fallen for. Chapman ends the call, a sly smile on his face. It's not just the success that pleases him, it's the thrill of pulling off the impossible. By the end of the war, Eddie Chapman had become one of MI5's most audacious assets. He played both sides with remarkable skill, delivering critical victories for the Allies while maintaining the trust of the Germans. Yet for all his successes, the question of his true motivations lingered. Was he a hero, driven by a desire to defeat the Nazis, or was he simply a man who saw espionage as the ultimate con? Eddie Chapman's work as Agent Zigzag solidified his place in history as one of World War II's most enigmatic figures. But as the war raged on, his double life became increasingly tangled with both professional and personal consequences. Eddie Chapman was not just a spy or a criminal. He was a man who thrived on connection, on charm, and on the attention of others. This was especially true when it came to women. Chapman, love and espionage were often intertwined, each complicating the other in ways both exhilarating and dangerous. During his early days as a double agent, Chapman rekindled a relationship with Frida Stevenson, a British woman who had been his fiancée before his imprisonment. Frida represented stability, a connection to the life he might have lived had he chosen a different path. Yet Chapman's life was anything but stable. At the same time, Chapman began a romance with Dagmar Lallum, a Norwegian actress living under the shadow of war. Dagmar was captivating, intelligent, glamorous, and perhaps most intriguingly, suspected of being involved in intelligence work herself. Theirs was a whirlwind affair, filled with clandestine meetings and whispered conversations. Dagmar saw in Chapman a dashing man of mystery, while Chapman saw in her a partner who could match his wit and daring. But Eddie's double life wasn't confined to espionage. It extended to his relationships, where he juggled his affections for Frida and Dagmar with remarkable dexterity. In letters to Frida, he spoke of longing and a desire to settle down. In moments with Dagmar, he was the daring adventurer, swept up in the romance of the moment. Yet both relationships were fraught with tension. Each woman, in her own way, sensed the danger and complexity of loving a man like Chapman. After the war, Chapman seemed to crave normalcy, or at least his version of it. He married Betty Farmer, a woman who had been part of his life before his espionage days. Betty stood by him through his trials, and their reunion marked a rare moment of stability in Chapman's tumultuous life. Together, they had a daughter, and for a brief time, Chapman appeared to embrace a quieter existence. But even in marriage, Chapman's restless nature lingered. His time as a double agent had left scars, emotional, psychological, and relational. The thrill of espionage, the constant danger, and the web of lies he had spun made it difficult for him to fully step away from the chaos. Chapman's relationships were not just personal, they were deeply entangled with his work as a spy. Frida and Dagmar each provided him with cover stories, alibis, and emotional support during critical moments of his missions. But these relationships also created vulnerabilities. At any moment, a misstep could expose his double life, endangering not only himself, but those he cared about. MI5, for their part, kept a close watch on Chapman's personal affairs. They recognized that his relationships could either aid or undermine his work. In reports, they noted his charm, his ability to win trust, and his panache for risk taking, even in matters of the heart. For Eddie Chapman, love was as much a game as espionage. It was a world where loyalty was fluid, where emotions were both a strength and a weakness. Yet, despite the complications, Chapman's relationships revealed a deeply human side to the man who lived in the shadows. He was not just Agent Zigzag, the cunning double agent. He was Eddie, a man who loved and lost, who sought connection even as he thrived in deception. With the war behind him, Chapman's focus shifted to life after espionage. But the echoes of his past, his love, his lies, and his loyalties, would follow him, shaping the legacy he left behind. When the war ended in 1945, Eddie Chapman found himself at a crossroads. For years, his life had been defined by danger, deception, and the constant thrill of living on the edge. Now, with peace restored, the question loomed: what place could a man like Eddie Chapman find in a world no longer at war? For Chapman, the answer lay in telling his story, or at least the version he wanted the world to know. In the years following the war, Chapman began to write about his exploits, his memoirs, published in 1953 under the title The Eddie Chapman Story, painting him as a daring double agent, a man who had risked everything for king and country. The book was a sensation. Readers were captivated by the tale of a petty criminal who had played both sides in one of history's most dangerous games. Yet, for all its intrigue, the memoir was as much a work of self-mythology as it was a recounting of facts. Critics and historians would later question the accuracy of Chapman's account, pointing to inconsistencies and exaggerations. But Chapman didn't seem to care. For him, the narrative was as important as the truth. It was his way of controlling his legacy, of ensuring that his name would not be forgotten. Chapman's fame reached new heights when his story was adapted into the film Triple Cross, starring Christopher Plummer. The film, named after Chapman's ability to double and triple cross his enemies, presented a Hollywoodized version of his life. Plummer's portrayal captured Chapman's charm and daring, but the film glossed over the moral ambiguities that made his story so compelling. Watching the film, Chapman reportedly laughed at the dramatizations, amused by the way his life had been transformed into entertainment. Yet he also reveled in the attention, enjoying his role as a public figure. Despite his criminal past and morally gray actions, Chapman's wartime contributions earned him a degree of respect. Among his peers, he was seen as a man who had done what was necessary to survive, and in doing so, had helped the Allied cause. Yet, his legacy was not without controversy. Some viewed him as a hero, while others saw him as an opportunist who had simply been in the right place at the right time. Chapman himself seemed unbothered by the debate. He was unapologetically himself, a man who had lived his life on his own terms. In interviews, he spoke candidly about his past, his motivation, and his love of adventure. He often described himself as a rogue who got lucky, but those who knew him best understood that his success was no accident. It was the result of a sharp mind, a silver tongue, and an unshakable instinct for survival. In his later years, Chapman retreated from the public eye, settling into a quieter life. He remained a figure of fascination for historians and biographers, many of whom sought to unravel the complexities of his character. Was he a patriot or a pragmatist, a hero or a villain? The truth, as with much of Chapman's life, lay somewhere in between. Eddie Chapman passed away on December 11, 1997, at the age of 83. His death marked the end of an extraordinary life, but his story continued to captivate. For historians, Chapman represented the moral ambiguities of wartime, a man who defied easy categorization. For the public, he was a symbol of resilience, resourcefulness, and the enduring allure of the anti hero. At the heart of Eddie Chapman's story is a question that has no simple answer. What defines a hero? Is it courage, loyalty, or the results of one's actions? Or is it something more elusive, something tied to the circumstances of the moment and the choices one makes under pressure? Eddie Chapman was a man of shadows, a figure who operated in gray areas of morality and allegiance. He was a thief, a spy, a double agent, and a master manipulator, but above all, he was a survivor. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Eddie Chapman, one of history's most enigmatic figures. If you've enjoyed unraveling the mysteries and complexities of his life, don't forget to follow History Crossroads. Here, we explore the stories of individuals who stood at the crossroads of history, making choices that shaped their times and sometimes the world. Subscribe, leave a comment, and join us next time as we uncover another tale of intrigue, courage, and the enduring human spirit.